This time we're going to talk about Yerim-Mor Kingdom, continuing with our little series on looming Gaia kingdoms. I talked a little bit about Yerim-Mor. I think it was the Matuzu video that I did. That's actually a good place to start because in that one I talked about their river getting messed up and all that. So I guess that's where I'm going to start with this one. I'm just going to start from the beginning. Yerim-Mor is the Green Kingdom. Their color, official color or whatever, is green on the map. And they're also known as the Sun Kingdom. And that's because they're located in the desert, and in early times and in modern times they see the sun as both their enemy and their friend, and it's an important part of the Yerim-Mor culture. But anyway, starting from pretty much the beginning, Yerim-Mor kingdom was primarily Fae and magic users and magic using Gaians, and the reason for that is because of its desert location. Basically, the land was not very fertile here. The early Yerim-Morites, they kind of started along this little river, and that was the entire lifeblood of their kingdom, is this one river. And back then it was called the Sunglow River. They really depended on this river because its water gave the magical peoples energy, which they could then turn into magic. So basically, by staying hydrated, it allowed them to survive long enough to use magic to grow crops in this crappy desert soil that wasn't really accommodating, to anybody that tried to grow anything there without magic. They were kind of shit out of luck. So magical peoples really thrived in this area where other peoples didn't. It kind of became known as a kind of like a Fey nation, and again, not out of any kind of malice or anything, but just because that's just what the geography would allow. When they did that, everything was good for a while, and the kingdom was prosperous, and life was pretty good, and they were very reliant on magic, and because of that, magic requires a lot of education, and Fae generally live a lot longer than commoners do. Like an elf, their natural lifespan is twice as long as a human's, so they use all that time becoming very educated in magic, and Yerim-Mor Kingdom would really push education, and people were very, very educated in order to learn this magic to grow the crops and survive, and even resist the heat and all the sandstorms and all the hazards that would come from being in a desert that you would think would be totally inhospitable. Yeah, anyway, life was good for a while, and then I talked about this before, but at some point Yerim-Mor people discovered that there was gold in the Sunglow River. Not just a little bit of gold, but like a lot of gold, like a crazy amount of gold. Suddenly, everybody was rich. The kingdom became very prosperous and became the wealthiest in the world because just all this gold was just pouring out of this river like crazy. It just kept coming and coming, and then Matuzu Kingdom to the south of Yerim-Mor Kingdom, they started getting a little bit paranoid. The leadership at the time was like, ooh, I don't like them, having this much power. I don't like our neighbor having all this wealth and power. Then they might come and take us over or whatever. Even though they weren't enemies at the time, Matuzu Kingdom got really paranoid, and they just went and attacked Yerim-Mor preemptively. They were like, we're gonna start shit with them before they start shit with us, basically. And so Matuzu launched an attack on Yerim-Mor, and they chose to do it right after this huge earthquake happened. And this earthquake really damaged Yerim-Mor's economy, their people. I mean, it really left them reeling, but they were like, oh, well, with all this gold, we'll be fine. But no, not not with Matuzu Kingdom on the way. So Matuzu swept in just like a vulture right after this earthquake hit, and really fucked up the kingdom. Like, however many generations it's been, Yerim-Mor still has not recovered from, the Sunglow River is now called the Gold River since the gold was discovered. So Matuzu came in, fucked them up, and this was called the Gold River War. And it's referenced in some of the Lumengaya short stories. It actually gets referenced quite a bit in a few of them. And it was a pretty important event because Yerim-Mor was no longer the wealthiest kingdom, it's actually the very poorest. Left in such a horrible state because Matuzu came in. They didn't just come in and take the gold and then pull out and, they came in and, some of them were like, let's start an industry here. This is free land shit, like we could do whatever we wanted here and we got all this gold. Let's start an industry here. Let's move a lot of Matuzu's dirty industry here. So basically we're not shitting where we eat. So a lot of Matuzu's entrepreneurs and people and whatever, they all came over to Yerim-Mor, and once they came over to get some of this gold, they decided to stay. And so now it was once a nation of elves and magical peoples that relied on their own magic to grow their food and survive. Now there's suddenly commoners in the mix. There's people who can't use magic in the mix. There's people who really don't care about pollution all that much because it doesn't affect them as much as it affects the Fae. So these basically Matuzan people came in and started factories and started kind of moving their dirty industry over there and fucking shit up even worse. And of course sending all the money back home, and Yerim-Mor in that land doesn't see any benefit from what the Matuzans are doing to it. Anyway, the native people, the native Morites of Yerim-Mor Kingdom, are left in a state where they are just wretchedly poor. The river that once, allowed them to have the power to grow their own food and allowed them to have magic and everything, it's now destroyed. I mean, it's toxic. They can't really drink from it. When they do, they get really sick and they can't use their magic. Yeah, I mean, you can put all that together and imagine that it's a really awful place to be now, and even so many generations later, it just hasn't been able to recover because these Matuzan business people are still occupying it. Their factories and their industries are still occupying Yerim-Mor land and still poisoning the river, still poisoning the soil and oppressing the native population, basically. This place is just like so not what it used to be and has really fallen from grace big time. And in the story, this place actually does get like physically visited a few times in the stories. Like the characters go there, and every time they go to Yerim-Mor Kingdom, they're just like, what the fuck happened? Like, it looks like this place got bombed and dropped on it, and it did, and it's people are just wretchedly poor, and it's a mess. It's a mess of a kingdom today. There are some, especially the old folks, the older Morite population especially, really wants to see this place do better. Like, it really wants to kick out the Matuzans and get everything back in order, and there's this big political push to be like, get these fuckers out of here, like they never belonged here, they're not contributing anything except, negativity, basically. They ruined everything and they continue to ruin everything. So like this push by some of the people really urging the leadership to be like, get these people out of here. But it's a little bit too late for that. Like, the Matuzans have really integrated and made the place their own, and at this point a lot of them were born there, and you can't just kick them out because that's their land too now. At this point, they were born into what their grandpappy started. It's not really their fault. So it's kind of a mess at this point. And the king, the current king, his name is Roz, Monarch Roz, and he's a old feeble goblin dude, and a lot of the population considers him spineless and bleeding hard, and he's too weak and feeble to lead the nation because he's not pushing back against Matuzu the way that they feel he should be. Roz's policies lie more in, let's rebuild. Let's just let the past be the past. Matuzu, their military doesn't really occupy our land anymore. Let's just let it go and do our best to just pull ourselves out of the mud, and we can handle this because we made this desert hellhole hospitable once and we can do it again. And that's kind of that's his whole attitude. He's very, very old and kind of traditional and really conflict avoidant. He really does not want a war. He doesn't feel that his kingdom can handle a war. But a lot of his people disagree, and they say, well, what do we have to lose? You know, we have nothing to lose. We need to take back some of our land from Matuzu. We need to go sack some of Matuzu's settlements, you know, that are out in the desert that used to be ours, and take them back so we can get our economy rolling again and take back some of our power. And anyway, there's just this whole kind of political thing going on there, and it becomes this conflict throughout the stories too. Yerim-Mor becomes a pretty important place in the stories for several characters, and also just stuff happening in the background. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on in that region too. There's the Divine of Hate actually makes that his home, because it's just he's known as the Divine of Hate, but he's also the Divine of Violence and Warfare and Strife and just every negative thing that humanity is capable of. This divine represents that, and he's this immortal, something like a god in a way. And they call him mankind's disgrace because he just represents all of that. And some say he's actually responsible for the whole Gold River War. There's a whole theory that he actually somehow got Matuzu to go pull that bullshit way back in the day. So it does tie into the stories quite a bit. I guess because I always talk about life in these places just to give you a more personal look into them. I'm sure you can gather by what I've said already that living in Morite land is not something that anybody wants. Now the land is surrounded by desert, and I mean miles and miles of really hostile, scary, dangerous desert. And so it's really, really hard to get out if you're born here. And if you somehow end up stuck here, you're going to be stuck here for a while because you need money to secure transportation to get out of here. So the people who live there, 99% of them do not want to be there. There's really no rich people except for the foreign entrepreneurs that really are only there to run their business. They're not even there the majority of the time. So there's a mass slavery going on that isn't legal, but the kingdom doesn't have the resources to enforce that. So a lot of these Matusan entrepreneurs and factories owners and stuff use the native population as workers, but really they're pretty much slaves. I mean, they get paid next to nothing, if at all, and they have no choice but to do it. So I would say if you're the average person in Yerim-Mor Kingdom, you are very poor, you are miserable, you are working 15 hours a day for some foreign schmuck that, you know, you've never even seen their face, and you really see none of the benefit that they see. So if you got some clothes on your back, you're lucky. If you got food in your stomach, you're lucky. I guess best case scenario for people here is that you're a noble. And even then, the nobles, they're like what the rest of the world would consider middle class. I mean, they're really not. Most of them are not in super great shape themselves. They don't really have a lot to their names. Military. Actually, I had a couple pages, I think, about the Yerim-Mor military because, well, of course the kingdom's crumbling, so the military's crumbling. And there's a few characters in the stories that are ex-members of the Morite military. All of them left, all of these characters anyway, left the military because they just stopped paying them enough for it to be worth it. The kingdom just does not have the funding, so, you know, one of the best positions you could be in is probably an elite gazella, or what they call an elite gazella unit. It's an elite military unit that Yerim-Mor has, and if you're an elite gazella, you're probably either human or an elf. You have to be pretty lightweight because your whole shtick as this military unit is that you ride a gemsbok, which is, it's a real world animal. It's a something like a antelope, and it lives in the desert. I don't think you can ride them in real life, but in Luangaya they do ride them into battle, and they're considered very highly respected members of the military. They're very highly trained. They're very dangerous, and they're really the only ones in the military that deserve it, get any kind of pay to make their position worth their while. Best case scenario, you could be a noble or an elite gazella, and that's pretty much your your best bet for living in this kingdom and having any kind of a decent life. Otherwise, you're a peasant or a slave, and you're probably trying to get out or finding some way to get out. And I guess this was touched upon in a story. Evangelite Skip Methusen Sway, one of the characters meets a slave, a Methusen slave, and she's working in a Methusen palace for some nobles. And she explains that she came from Yerim-Mor, and basically her chief of her village sold her to Methusen slavers. And the person, the character talking to her is like, God, that's horrible. I'm so sorry. Like, don't you want to go home? And aren't you sad that this happened? And she explains to him, like, no, like, this is the best thing that could have happened to me. Everybody back home was dying of disease and famine, but here I am in a palace, and like, yeah, I'm a slave and I'm completely disrespected, but I have a roof over my head. When I'm sick, they take care of me. The whole point of that scene was to highlight like just how bad it is in Yerim-Mor, where people are like happy to be slaves in foreign territory just because it gets them out of Yerim-Mor territory. Like, it's so bad there that they don't even care that they're enslaved, they just want out. I think that's really a testament to, I mean, it sums up just life in Yerim-Mor Kingdom in a nutshell, really. So I think that's all I got to say about that one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.